Hello, I am Seyran Kademi, an AI scientist, your host and fellow architecture enthusiast, coming to you from the Delft University of Technology. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting Nathalie de Vries, a visionary architect, a professor of public building at the Department of Architecture, and one of the founding partners of NVRDV. NVRDV is an internationally renowned architecture and urban design practice founded in 1992 by Winnie Moss, Jacob van Rijs, and Nathalie de Vries, three architects who met while studying at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. The name NVRDV is derived from their initials of the founders' surnames. Based in Rotterdam, NVRDV has established itself as a pioneering force in contemporary architecture, known for its innovative and experimental approach to design. The firm has gained recognition for its bold and imaginative projects that push the boundaries of the conventional architectural thinking. Welcome, Nathalie. Thank you for accepting my invitation. I'm very excited to start this conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great. So I just go straight to MVRDV, I think as one of the inspiring architectural firms that adopted technology very well. So you have established MVRDV Next as a working group, which is focused on technology and bringing the computational flow into the design process. And on this ground, I think you see this great potential of technology in architectural design. Can you tell us a bit about this? What is it that keeps you interested in the field of technology at the intersection of design?
Yeah, I think from early on, from the before even we started the office, we were already interested in starting to use computers in our profession. And in the early years, so it came all quite organically, I'd say. So in the early years, we started to use it as the tool to draw, to model 3D. And pretty soon, we also started to speculate about using data in design. And we worked together with, let's say, more whiz-kid kind of people to apply, to create models to shape plans with data. So to inform pixels, or I should actually say voxels from the next team.
Interesting.
Voxels with information. So, and we started to use the word data scaping as well. So it also became a very integral part of our idea about how to make designs, just to include also the usage of data as much as possible and to generate more possible options also. So we always like to see part of our innovation is to create, to investigate the boundaries of the questions asked to the architects and planners. And for that, we always like to figure out what could be the edge conditions of this design. No? What's the most optimum? What's the most extreme? What's the minimum? What's the maximum? Yeah, so to investigate the limits also. And yeah, it turned out that using information in design, but also modeling, later on scripting, and we're today talking yet about new possibilities, helped us to generate more design information and to use that in our designs. So it's a long sentence, but I'd say from starting to use it as a drawing tool to today using it as an aspect to generate images and information and to integrate that in our design. That's where we are today. And yeah, the future will bring probably even more. So we always embraced it.
Interesting. So when I listen to you, I see your vision as a sort of reflecting on the past, you know, when the computer came and you started using as a modeling and drawing tool. Do you see this trajectory to be linear towards AI, or do you see a jump? Do you see a huge difference? Let's say if you compare it for the time of internet, you know, when we could actually share knowledge differently, design knowledge differently, or collaborate and cooperate with different stakeholders in the design process. Do you sort of see the same vibe here, or do you feel like this is something different?
Well, I think usually these jumps are forecasted somehow. And since as architects, we're also allowed to speculate and to dream. And I think what we always were doing is sort of, yeah, I think a lot of parametric design also has speculative and imaginative elements in it. So our early studies with data were very limited, if you look at it, and we were also aware of that. But yet, to be able to use it, to have 4 different parameters shoving around little blocks on a site, we recognize the brain can handle maybe more complex information, but by using it as a tool, we also started to predict more or less what we would be doing on a large scale 10 years later with scripting. So experimenting with it, speculating with it, investigating it in an early phase allowed us to be ready at the moment when the big jump was, let's say, formalized and the real programs are coming up. So thinking about the usage of data in design, in our case, we think it's important because we see the world is getting more complex. We're with ever more people. Densification in a way that we still can create livable places is an important problem of our times. So we speculated that information and handling with more complex design topics could be helped by applying digital tools. So yeah, of course, at the moment, last year when all these EI programs were suddenly out there on the market, that feels like a jump moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yet at the same time, if you see how we start to use these programs now as tools, I would also say like the thinking about the tool and what you could apply for it has started already much sooner. So in our minds, it's a less big jump, one could say.
Yeah, because you've already been prepared for it. That's a very good point. And another interesting thing that I heard you're saying is that there is less place for error, right? Because we have less resources and then we have to design optimally. It's not okay anymore to make mistakes when you're building. Is that true?
Yes, there are pros and cons. So I would argue that architecture and urban design have a large creative component as well. It's how you integrate. That needs a vision, and like I said, needs certain forms of speculation. But at the same time, I recognize that for the good and for the worse, datafication and information is also, for a large part, starting to govern our profession. So at the faculty here in Delft, I'm using a word for that, multiplicity in design.
Mm-hmm.
And previously in my office, we were using a word like datascaping. But we also have to be careful that we learn our students, for example, but also inside the office, that we should not only be governed by information. So datification of design means you all the time have to reach measurable goals. I have to get a certain label. I have to create a certain energy level. I have to reduce the weight of the building. I have to only use a limited amount of material. So you have a lot of limits, libraries, collections, laws, etc. And I would not necessarily say that just by combining all these limitations and applying all these regulations, you have the best possible design. It is how you handle them and how you interpret them and how you use them. And thinking about it in a relative way is also important. We need also politics, for example, and economists and scientists to create good parameters. There's a lot of discussion in the Netherlands about the sustainability goals, for example. Are they really as good as possible? Are the guidelines we are using, are they scientifically proved, or are they also the consequence of lobbying of the building industry, for example? If a material is considered good or bad, for example, in the carbon dioxide scale.
Interesting.
It's a very complex question. And we see that there are not yet absolute truths in that. So I think that knowing that we apply so many information, but also a lot of limits, the datification of our profession is very, very present. One of the most simple ones, economics, the price of the building. But I think in every design process, also interpreting and understanding what you apply and how you should apply it and maybe help to improve it or change it or question it. Is still an important topic for architects as well. So
I think this is indeed a very complex industry. Many stakeholders, multiplicity. That was the word, right?
Multiplicity in design. I didn't even mention it then. I think. Yeah. So I always say a simple example. We like, for example, a facade to be nice, daylight in and out, openable, close. We might like to use certain materials because of the context. Modern, historical, etc. It needs to be sustainable. So this same facade, it has to save energy. Maybe at the moment it starts to generate energy, or when it becomes green, it takes carbon dioxide out of the air. So that same facade needs to deal with a multiplicity of demands. And this obliqueness almost of working on it is what I call now multiplicity in design. Nothing is singular anymore.
Yeah.
But can it be everything at the same time? Probably not. So you have to somehow interpret and mix and mingle all these aspects and come to certain optimums.
Okay. Interesting. So, indeed, let's say in this very complicated landscape of optimizing for different, let's say, criteria, do you see AI especially as a game changer? For example, as a mediator in urban regulations and politics, the stakeholders, other stakeholders, citizens even, you know? And I know among the three founders of VRDV, you are very much also into the social, let's say, part of the projects. You're interested in the integration of the social features, aspects, values into the design. Also, you mentioned this really new possibilities of AI that it's actually available for everyone, large language models. Do you see that this could be a game changer in this negotiation? Or do you think still far-fetched because the concepts and the negotiations are a way more than what this, let's say, models can handle in terms of intelligence?
Yeah, you're also talking about who is using it, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I of course in preparation of this interview, I also had a discussion inside my office. With
Okay,
the team,
interesting.
that
I'm
is
curious.
researching on the AI, and yeah, for example, they did a deep dive into German sustainability protocols and rules and regulations, but also looking at examples of application. And what they did is that they asked ChatGPT for help, because that apparently is fed with a lot of information about German sustainability and about German projects and their performance, their energy performance. At the same time, our team dealing with these topics of sustainability also researched in a, let's say, more conventional way what they thought would be good examples and good applications of rules and regulations. So they did that in parallel because and then you also still discover some discrepancies or anomalies. So it's a very recent thing. Of course, we don't know yet what these models are fed with, how much information they actually have if they don't start to dream, etc. But you do. It's very fascinating to realize that if we will be a couple of years further, that these models will indeed be able to help us in the shortest possible way to find good information that normally takes much more time to find for the people in our office. But yeah, and another thing, of course, what is talked about a lot is, for example, generating floor plans or these kind of programs that also exist already. Again, for us as an office, it becomes, for example, interesting that first of all, you can just apply the information that is out there, but then you're also relying on what it is fed with and what it will feed you with. So for us, it's interesting that there are also programs that allow to build and customize the sources. So that means that we feed it with information that comes from our office and that stays within our office. So that means that we can develop our own models. So stable diffusion can be customized.
Oh, interesting.
And then you get an MVRDV output, for example, and it works with the parameters that we think are interesting.
Domestifying AI to MVRDV.
Yeah. And in design, as in art, there is no general truth. So you might want to use, of course, scientific information, and you should be able to verify if it comes from the best possible sources. But if it's just an unknown, I thought about my children when they went to school in the zeros. We talked about how they prepared for small talk. Like, do you all get it from the internet, or do you also still have to go to the library? And at what point do you start to think yourself? Like, where do you get your information from?
Okay.
I think at that time we didn't consider the internet and Wikipedia yet as the most reliable source of information, and it was much more complicated to verify it.
Yeah.
But I think at the moment, of course, we are working with models that have been on the market only very shortly. But also we realize that, for example, for image generation, we want to create our images and we want to customize it. Now, you were talking about the social aspect. So yes, I can imagine that people will be able to create maybe their own models or truths more easily. But what we realize is that it's, for example, the image world is still very much a 2D world. So it's not 3D. And
That's
as
true.
architects, we work a lot with 3D renders, and you can look at things from all sides.
Yeah.
On the other hand, in communication, we have sometimes urban studies that have a limited budget. Let's say we can make drawings, but with the help of AI, we can also generate more impressions and images to communicate with a larger audience, not of specialists, but a neighborhood. Or so I can also imagine that these tools will help us to generate much more images and maybe someday realistic walkthroughs, so that you can have a good talk with a community about a plan and provide them very early on with quite realistic representations of what it might look like, for example.
Yeah.
And you can also maybe be more clear about the quality of the plan. You can be more open about the sources of information.
Democratizing design.
That-
That's what
yes.
it brings.
Yeah, it's not a black box. It doesn't have to be a big black box anymore.
Yeah.
So this image generation is already possible now. For us, it's now important that we're not depending on what models give us, but that we can generate the images that we think are clearly coming from our office and from our own source.
So it's closer to the true representation of the design and VRDV's design, and
Yeah.
then customizing these tools to
Yeah.
work for you. I think it's a big game changer, right? In terms of the communication and.
Well, let's say it enhances our possibilities.
Okay, I see.
So it can take certain parts of our design process can be made faster, maybe also therefore cheaper, or we can do it ourselves instead of having to hire or ask somebody to do
Yeah.
this. But it's about taking certain parts of the design process and being able to perform that faster or more precise. It's not necessarily taking away the whole process of making a design, coming up with a concept, finalizing it, making edits and choices at the end, generating it, choosing from all the possible models the version that we think is the best. It's an optimization tool, as have all the tools that were invented in the past of our design process.
That's quite accurate, I would say, because, well, if you see design as an optimization process, you start from an initial point and then you find your way towards optimum. These tools can give you a better initial point where you're closer to the optimum, but still, as an architect, you need to iterate to the point that satisfies all the constraints and at the end gives you the best results that also satisfies you.
Yeah.
As a designer, right?
Yeah, as ever, maximizing, for example, the usage on a building plot doesn't necessarily mean that you have made the best design, of course.
No.
not always for the environment in the context. So if we only seek it to maximize, so optimization definitely also includes aesthetical, cultural, political, social, etc. choices. Still.
Multiplicity.
So multiplicity, but also
Love that.
multidisciplinary, and
Yeah,
also
sure.
it needs ethics. I think we're of course now at a point of time, and I'm also listening to sometimes podcasts like Hard Fork. So I
Okay,
can recommend
super.
that. But it's totally clear that we also now need governments and politics to think about data and information,
Mm-hmm.
how these models are used, who owns it. Like if I put information in it and it's a generic program, where will it come out again in another part of the world or in the model, or does it train with a certain mindset, like in a Californian mindset, for example,
Yes.
a very ultra liberal mindset, or why would that be a good?
But is it also
course.
like concerns you in terms of ownership? So let
Yeah.
me push you a bit in here. So, for example, New York Times recently started a case against OpenAI because of this generative model using their articles. You know,
Exactly.
it's a matter of ownership. How do you feel about, let's say, a generative model that can generate designs and then they just took all the MVRDV's public data out there and then it's there? It's not anymore your property because it's engraved in this machine and everyone can use it. What's the ownership, balance here? How do you how do you see the future of?
Well, it is already possible. I think you can prompt it in the style of. So I don't know if I haven't really tried. Maybe you can say in the style of MVRDV. Like
But how do you feel about it if everyone can do MVRDV
Well,
style?
like I said before, well, I think that's super funny. They can do it now by hand and copying it, and you can do it maybe now super fast in just making an image. But it's not. First of all, it's not 3D, and secondly, that's precisely the reason why we now try to investigate better these customization tools.
Mm-hmm.
So that it means that if we generate images, we use our own models. We have control of the output. So I don't mind if everybody wants to copy it, but let's say we still create new designs with new parameters and new insights for new possibilities and new questions. So what we do is what we do, and I think it's very interesting that we can use our own sources and train models with our own back catalog, or like I said, using our own shifts and parameters, what we think is.
I heard very important thing, Natalie. I just wanted to go back to it because this is a very consistent thinking of you. Because when we were talking about softwares, you said, okay, this is just a continuation of computer helping us to design our built environment. And then I'm coming to the authorship, and then you said, well, they could do copy MVRDV with pen and pencil before. So this is just another way, and then we still have a confidence that we can create something new. So I think this is a crucial point here, that if we see a computer sort of as an aid in the design process and in the creation process, I mean, across all the industries now I'm talking about. And then, well, people could actually do copy paste stuff before the computer. It's just now, maybe it's easier. So maybe the scale matters a bit. But I think this is a very interesting point. I just want to emphasize on it that people could do this before.
And the question of the people who do this, like in the style of, like, what if you say, it's of course very much used in the style of Edvard Munch or let's say Van Gogh.
Yeah.
But would Van Gogh really have done it that way? And to what point are you getting in an area called kitsch?
Yeah,
like a bad,
true.
interpretation. So, but now for us, for example, being able to image generate very quickly helps us to think, do we want this room to be blue or black? Do we want to use brick or steel? And yes, of course, with all these other parameters where it's good or bad to use a certain material, but we can also change the atmosphere very quickly in a building, for example. Then you can talk about light and color and finishing and textures. So the same tool that we're now a bit laughing about because it can do it in a certain style, if you start to use it again for things that are quite close to what we have to make as decisions in our profession, yeah, that's really helpful, I'd say, because that's how we already are using it as well.
Okay. I think, yes, I think that the hype is a bit now around generative AI because this is something that truly transforms the way that we can communicate, and the productivity is boosted enormously using the generative AI. But I want to again touch upon what you said about, I think, how do we know what we know? You know, back in time, going to the library, doing research, making sure that we have facts, and we built, let's say, our perception of word based on these piece of truths. I think that's the research, you know, that's how humans started to analyzing things. And I think AI is also a transformative tool in that direction. And I want to ask you, do you see design, architectural design, to become more as this, I would say, scientific quest, right? Coming from a science background, we try always to come with hypotheses, collect data, testify the hypothesis, like the way you test, let's say, the design hypothesis, right? So then you have this image, you test different, let's say, options, and then you come to the ones that it's closer to what you want. So that's the optimization process. But now I'm talking about the precedence, you know. As an architect, you should be able to analyze the word in a very complex and in different layers, you know, social, technical, political, all these things. And maybe AI could be a source of knowledge that you could actually build this, let's say, scientific approach to design. Should we start formulating the design as a scientific quest, or this is just me being in academia and I'm just completely ignorant of the complexities, you know, deadlines, different stakeholders pushing through the design process? So just guide me here, whether I'm just too far-fetched in this landscape?
Yes, I think part of the things we do are not scientific. It's also, like I say, in what way should we live in the future? How do we make cities that perform well and are agreeable to live in and healthy for everybody, but also have a certain sense of beauty? And I think a lot about actually what a professor here, who was previously here in actually in this faculty that we're in now of industrial design, did. It's called Kees van Dorst,
Oh,
and
okay.
he talked very much about the design frame. We talk about design also as something that, unlike science, we want to have a certain outcome, maybe, and we frame that to a certain degree. And then we add knowns and unknowns. We follow usually certain processes and workflows as well to get there, the design process. So he made a really beautiful diagram of that, showing question mark plus question mark is outcome as a kind of description for what design can be. And maybe one of the question marks combined with the outcome is the design frame. Now, scientists think slightly different about those kind of topics. So you don't necessarily work towards a possible framed outcome. I think
Definitely, definitely. I think that's you. You actually.
you provide me with the question, filling in the question marks as a scientist. I think I use the information, but the editing and the combining needs to have a certain purpose. And this purpose I am already starting to think about before I even start to design.
That's a very interesting point because you're right. I think in science we are quite curiosity driven. You know, we don't have a problem in mind per se to solve, but I think design always starts from a problem. You're trying to design to solve a problem to make our lives a bit
Yeah.
easier, you know. So that's the goal. However, what is this mastermind behind solving this problem? And where does he or she gets his or her knowledge? You know,
Yeah.
that's where I start from. And because in order to solve that problem, you have to collect large amount of diverse information about many things. And do you see AI being a potential assistant there?
Yeah, it can also be a threat to a certain
Okay,
degree.
tell me about it. It's getting
Well,
interesting.
while you were talking, I was thinking about, at the moment, of course, we think a lot about reusing existing buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And precisely at the point when buildings became most economical and optimized, office buildings, for example, a lot of recent office buildings, say from the 70s and that's the buildings we are now demolishing first. So because the buildings that were built before that can be a bit over dimensioned because
Mm-hmm.
people maybe not have the necessary tools to make a very construction drawing. They had to make estimations.
Mm-hmm.
The floor to ceiling heights are lower in the newer buildings because it was economical. But these also turned out to be the buildings that are less flexible to transform. But they were most economical. You saved
Yeah.
on building height and whatever. So economically, they were very good. So you see, also there's a danger in pursuing everything to the max. Yeah. So if we look at very old buildings, like the warehouses, for example, they are very generic also. So one of the most important elements of my multiplicity theory is also actually transformability.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily leading to a lot of specificity and leaving certain things multi-interpretable, multi-usable is just as important. And maybe that means that you have to overinvest a bit in height or depth. But at the same time, it offers still a lot of possibilities as well. And to be able to do that, you need arguments. You need cultural arguments. Maybe you need examples. You need to show that there's an unknown future. Maybe it is also nicer to be in a high space with a high ceiling than in a very low ceiling, for example. So that's social science as well, but also
Psychology as well.
yeah, and maybe there's also a notion of the sublime, and then I'm thinking about art also. So it is simply something you can hardly explain, maybe.
Yeah.
So why do we still like the Pantheon, for example? What was it exactly made for? So the fact that our environment also has those kind of notions is still very important as well, and that we don't get lost in a forest of specificities and knowledge. And
But those are, to me, what you're saying, this is knowledge, right? So this is knowledge that, for example, you are telling me these things that I don't know.
yeah, Yeah.
And you know these things because you've been in this industry for a long time and then you have studied this for quite some time. But that's exactly knowledge what I'm talking about. Can we sort of speed this process, you know?
Well, we say it's an iterative process, I think, as architects. It's research by design. So we try to combine certain aspects in a design within this frame. Then we investigate what is the result of this step that we have taken, or what is possible with these when I combine these decisions into a nice design. Then I reflect on it. Does it fit my ambitions, the frame work? And then I go back maybe a couple of steps. So this is where I started to apply this aspect, but maybe the column grid should be different because maybe it's optimized now, but not for all the users, or maybe it limits me as well, or maybe the visual factor is not good. For example, when you think about optimizing your structure,
Yeah.
for example, because it simply doesn't create the type of space you think is performing.
Yes, and again, I see that AI could be very useful here because in this iteration, if you have more options,
You can check much faster.
much
So this is
faster
a time-consuming process, and we realize indeed that with the help of digital tools, we can investigate indeed much more options and faster. So in that sense, yeah, but you still need to edit and to make a choice at some point. And
Yeah.
weigh which elements and aspects are more important. And then, so therefore, you also need this final thinking and framework and this conceptualizing that is so important in the profession of spatial design.
So it's more of the evaluation part remains at the hand of the architect because then there are so many things that has to be checked at the same time and there are so many undefined or unknown, what you're saying, that needs to be checked by architects.
Yeah, and I used to do it maybe when I was young with paper and tracing paper, drawing it again and again.
Uh-huh.
And now the same thinking takes place, but with the help of the computer.
Yeah, it's just faster.
It's just faster, but it's still the same type of thinking. But since it is faster, it also allows us to include more aspects. So it's faster, but we also have more and more parameters that we have to deal with. So in total, the process might take the same time, except we have more time to include more information.
Yes. Great. Thanks. Lots of, I think, important information and I would say notes here to think about. I would like to move a bit towards a more specific domain of AI. And we already talked about the images. I'm talking about computer vision. That's also my background. Models that they can generate images, I mean, they're all fascinating and they took the world by storm. Again, I'm thinking of could computer vision become a new, let's say, pair of glasses for architects that they can see beyond just one image and two image and 100 image. So can we find patterns in the built environment that was not discovered before? Do you see this potential? And how do you see if that's becoming a thing that you can actually look at the whole city, look at the whole Netherlands, look at the whole Europe at once? Because we as human, we are like limited. We cannot make, comparative analysis for lots of images at the same time. If this, let's say, technology gives you this ability to see unknown patterns, how do you see that it would help architect now in this iterative process?
Well, we already, of course, have, compared to our predecessors, an incredible access to images. I mean, to a point where you go to all kinds of, let's say, Instagram or whatever, Pinterest, and can find anything you like. No, if you
Yeah,
use the
but
right
that's
search
engine.
search engine. No, but I think what is still a fundamental misunderstanding is that when you're an architect, urban designer, you make spatial design, which is 3D, has 4D aspects. If you want to, we talk about sublimeness or whatever, emotion. So yeah, sure, probably there we can, but at the same time, as long as these models are not trained on 3D knowledge, don't know what's happening inside, yeah, it is not enough.
But okay, let me ask you something. Floor plan is 2D, and it seems quite informative for architects, right? So many, I think, in early design phases, these are the things that are exchanged, still not 3D.
Absolutely, I had to trace it and draw it again and again and again. I knew my typology, but yet, what we noticed that we customize and feed, what is it, Stable Diffusion probably, with these models, but we feed them with Dutch floor plans, and they will not produce the floor plan that is perfect in Asia.
Yeah.
We'll feed them with affordable housing floor plans, and that's not what's happening in the high segment luxury.
Yeah, these
Asia.
are generalization problems, yes.
Yes. And they are not necessarily more clever than what we feed them with. So, like I said, in design, there's not one single solution. It's also cultural factors why people prefer certain floor plans above others.
Yeah.
So I think what they can do is to maybe optimize it in a kind of, I have shape and how many houses can I stuff into this site or mass. To make it economical, maybe under the best possible circumstances. But that's a very limited. It's an interesting tool. Certainly can start to apply it.
But still limiting
But
or
still
limited.
limiting. And it's also, of course, the question is, do you get the innovation that you want? So when you have to be in a kind of dialogue also then with the model.
Yeah.
How do you think innovation takes place if it generates trained on existing models?
Yeah.
So how do you add that element? So
The
it's
creativity.
And maybe a cultural change, like everybody having 6 children or only 2, or people living in different cultural modes. The danger could be that it is prejudiced, like all information. It feeds you with what has been put into it and who has done that.
But
and
like
what models does
humans,
it use.
right? Like humans, aren't we also?
Yeah.
Well, it's just that we have to be careful that we don't put lots of trust in these machines because.
Is there already not a lot of research on how models or the internet even is fed with certain information?
Yeah.
That can already be biased, for example.
Yeah, but my argument is always that so as
Yeah.
we are also biased, very biased, and because we are human, we are allowed to be biased, and machines, they become dangerous. I do agree that, that the perception of people towards machine that they're always doing the right thing has to change. So these are just machines, so they can make mistakes as well, and they could be biased and etc.
And even if you say about learn about city patterns, yes, of course, that's very interesting and important because you can, for example, learn in the future then maybe more about informal settlements or how people are really using their environment.
Okay,
But
interesting.
we are also learning from how it was in the past. Or what is the history, for example?
Yeah, so to time also.
Time.
Okay.
Or we also have to speculate on how it will be used in 50 years from now, because what we build now is not for tomorrow, but should survive, let's say, a couple of decades at least, hopefully.
Mhm.
So that means we also sometimes say what is there is not necessarily the best information for what should be there in the future. So again, this frame I'm talking about and these
Design
ambitions
frame.
that we should formulate together are just as important as always. So we are using tools and we should use them in the best possible way.
Tools. I think that's a part that I want to again push a bit further. Do you see AI as merely a tool, or do you think it becomes maybe a new methodological way to design? That was also related to my previous question. Because when we had internet, we started sharing differently. It means that we grow knowledge differently. And now we have these models that they can not only digest all this knowledge that we have shared for such a long time, 20 years, and then they can digest it and summarize it and give it back to you. And this becomes also a way to know things. Do you think that it's also a methodological shift in the design rather than just a tool? How do you feel about this? How do you see this?
I see it as a tool that allows to create, especially when it's faster, to allow to think about more topics and to think about more complexity. So in that sense, it is probably not just helping us, but also enriching us. If you manage to edit the growing amount maybe of information that you have to process, also in a fast way, also lose time here and there. So yes, that can potentially change the design process because you might have more time for other things, or you might be able to go more in depth into topics that previously you did not have time. But we also noticed, for example, that information about daylight and energy and materials were maybe things that in the past we were much more relying on other professions to give input on, from engineers to the contractor, the building specialist, for example. But we also understand that, enabled to interpret it, that's the question. Huh? In the front part of the design process, these tools help to get faster to certain conclusion. But I'm not necessarily sure that we not should verify the results still with certain types of specialisms. Yeah, so I would say I sometimes think that, for example, contemporary architects' offices are often a bit bigger than they were in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe because we have more tools to communicate with each other in an easy way. Yeah? So instead of a boss hanging over the drawing tables at night with a tracing pen and yellow stickers, checking from table to table the drawings, you now shoot PDFs at each other. Also, the span of control can be faster, the way you communicate with each other. I would make a drawing, I copy it. I'm talking about the 80s and 90s now. Put it on the mail. It would go to a consultant. Another consultant would get this drawing as well. The drawing would not be combined yet. So let's say things are speed up, integration becomes better. So, but do we necessarily design differently, more well informed, but maybe also a bit more overwhelmed sometimes? The integration, like I said, is still a matter also of making, editing it, having an ambition. I understand what you try to get at, but I think it's about improving, allowing maybe companies, offices to become larger and include more specializations and different trades. As an industry, it might change. I think.
Mm-hmm.
You hear me struggling. Huh? We don't know.
No, that's why
yet
we have the conversation. We don't
precisely.
have the
So
answer.
I have the idea that both as a single person you might be able to do more, but also companies can become bigger. So somewhere, it's going in multiple directions here. The possibilities that you have as a designer.
But I hear a nice, I would say, underlying tone here. You are gaining ground because many things that has to be outsourced before, and then you have to wait for a long time to get feedback on. Now, as an architect, you can have an opinion and have, let's say, result and something to base your decision on, which is, again, interesting.
I think it's also regaining ground.
Regaining ground, okay.
Because it's also maybe one of the origins of the profession, that you know a little bit about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And as specialisms grew, this general knowledge was much more distrusted. So it went into the hands of specialists. But then came the complexity of gathering all that information and bringing it together again. So I think for the generalism of the profession, it's almost going also to
regaining the ground. I love that.
I think we live in a time where integrative disciplines are very interesting and important, especially when these disciplines are able to not limit themselves to certain sources of information and knowledge. So that's my point. I think this is where the 21st century. So we're finally leaving a bit behind the functionalist, purely functionalist, or times. And that is in a new renaissance.
Interesting. I think we've digged a lot here, Natalie, with lots of things that, we were trying to find out what is this new technology, what is going to do with, let's say, industry. And now maybe looking at what's the relationship between the architect, you, someone's working in your office, and AI. There is this, I would say, a bit misconception, or you tell me, do you believe that AI will replace architect? I think there was a lot of information that we exchange now. I know the answer. This is for people that they're a bit toxified with, the information out there, media, existential threat. How do you feel? Do you really think that this is something that would replace architect?
Again, I also had a nice discussion with several people in my office about this. I mean, when I started 30 years ago, the computer was the big threat, for example, to the architect's office.
Was it this big, let's say
Yeah, they were really, it was like fundamentalism. Like you had it, do you want computers in your office? It was a discussion. It's a threat to our profession.
I like to hear that.
No, I also hear now, of course, sometimes a municipality or developer say, let's just prompt and generate this image ourselves. No, like we can describe it and it will be produced for us. what if our city is full of trees? Something like that. But what is the information of that? What is behind the information of that image? So you will probably see a lot of self generated images by people who are not necessarily professionals on that field. But they could have done it also now with scissors and paper. I don't know, with a graphic designer or, yeah, but of what uses it to them. So, like I said, the world we think in is a 3D world as architects. So, will it replace us? I think it can replace certain people, professions, like when we are more and more able to visualize our own projects, for example. Like I said, we can do the first estimations, guesstimations on building physics and building performances, for example. So, maybe there's a shift here and there. But so far, I think all these technology leaps have only led to expansion, maybe. I think what we should maybe be more worried about is the validation we give to what we do. So the biggest threat to architecture might be the reward that architects are getting for their work rather than AI, I'd say.
I see.
So what's the value of your work and how will it be seen? Is there a connection? Well, I think the proof is in the pudding. So ultimately, I say whatever tool I use, in the end, the building has to be built. So there will be a building where it is generated or through AI. The building itself will be the proof.
The object.
The object itself is very physical and very present in the world. So yeah, it's a great tool enhancement so far.
And this would be my last question. Within this, let's say, landscape, that there are more tools coming, expansion, you said. So this is a good news that you're gaining ground. There are, like, let's say, more space for more people to handle more complex aspect of the architecture as a medium between us and the built environment. What would you advise to these future architects? What kind of a skill do they need to develop to become successful, to fit in the future of this profession?
Well, I think it's important to understand what you want to do, what you want to achieve with the buildings you are designing, and be the master of the tool. And I hope we can make sure that we are understanding what kind of information it is that we are using when we apply the tool. So for now, the dual strategy is quite important. And like I said, we're still far away from the third dimension in the tools that we see coming now. So I don't know.
They're coming, so you don't have to wait.
You know, that's what you know, Sarah.
Yes,
when will we have the 3D generating AI?
it's coming. It's not taking far. And again, what I want to, of course, conclude here, if you say, okay, we have to be able to sort of quantify our trust on the output of these models, I would conclude that the new architect and someone aiming to master these tools should be able to understand the tool a bit, right? So that he or she could say something about the outcome to validate it.
I think we need discussion. We keep on needing discussions about what we want our environment to be like, what we want our cities to be like, what we want to have our buildings to be like. I mean, we come from a time when housing was considered very much a product, and look where we are now. So for those who thought housing is just a product, that kind of thinking has also led us to a housing crisis at the moment, for example. Part of it was this idea. And if we bring those things back into the realm of design, economy, politics, and ideology,
the same thing will happen.
Those are your words, but I think you see that we cannot solve everything by just turn it into a product or something that can be generated in the most economical, optimized way.
Yes, so we need architects who can think critically about the output of the tools and also about the larger outcome of it. What would be the implication of having the digital concept as an object, because that would populate our built environment and
this is the service we provide to society.
Great. Thank you again, Natalie. It's a pleasure to have you. To be continued.
Thank you.